Penggunaan tembakau nyata-nyata telah menjadi penyebab utama berbagai penyakit kronis seperti jantung, penyakit kanker, bronkitis, hingga stroke. Namun sayangnya sejumlah negara di dunia itu masih menjadi surga bagi para perokok dan juga para industri rokok. Nah, Indonesia bahkan menduduki ranking pertama dengan jumlah perokok tertinggi di dunia menurut riset Atlas Tobacco tahun 2015. Fakta miris lainnya adalah jumlah anak yang berinteraksi dengan tembakau pun terus bertambah. Nah, apa saja dampak panjang tembakau bagi anak-anak dan juga mengapa pengendalian tembakau itu begitu sulit dilakukan di negeri ini? Anda menyaksikan Insight, saya Desi Anwar.
Laporan yang dirangkum oleh kelompok hak asasi manusia Human Rights Watch menyebut sebagian besar pekerja anak ini mulai bekerja di pertanian tembakau sebelum berusia di bawah 15 tahun. Bahkan beberapa di antaranya saat masih berusia 8 tahun. Sebagian anak-anak ini juga bekerja sepanjang musim, dari musim tembakau hingga panen dan proses pengeringan daun tembakau. Mereka bekerja tanpa masker atau pelindung tangan yang layak, sehingga beresiko terpapar racun nikotin dan pestisida. Mual, muntah, dan sakit kepala merupakan gejala umum dari keracunan akut akibat nikotin. Namun banyaknya pekerja anak dan minimnya perlindungan bagi mereka bukanlah fokus utama produsen tembakau. Kondisi ini kian menjadi dilema karena kebanyakan pekerja anak di pertanian tembakau terpaksa putus sekolah. Mereka harus bekerja demi mendapat upah 10 hingga 15 ribu rupiah per hari untuk membantu ekonomi keluarga. Badan Pangan dan Pertanian Dunia atau FAO menyebut Indonesia merupakan produsen tembakau terbesar kelima di dunia setelah Tiongkok, Brasil, India, dan Amerika Serikat. Produksi tembakau di Indonesia pada tahun 2013 mencapai 260.200 ton. Indonesia pun menjadi salah satu negara yang belum menandatangani WHO Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, yakni perjanjian kesehatan masyarakat global yang bertujuan melindungi penduduk dari konsekuensi konsumsi tembakau dan paparan asap tembakau. Ardina Kartikasari, CNN Indonesia.
Ya, regulasi pemerintah menjadi kunci keberhasilan pengendalian tembakau di suatu negara. Selain tentunya aksi dan langkah nyata kampanye anti rokok yang juga harus terus-menerus dilakukan. Salah satu aktivis anti tembakau Matthew Myers yang juga presiden kampanye anak-anak bebas tembakau atau Tobacco Free Kids asal Amerika Serikat baru-baru ini berkunjung ke tanah air dan saya berkesempatan mewawancarainya. Dan Matthew menceritakan perjalanannya selama lebih dari 25 tahun di mana ia memperjuangkan hak-hak bebas rokok khusus bagi masyarakat, terutama anak-anak dan remaja. Saksikan wawancara saya berikut ini. Okay, well, Matt, thanks for talking to us and welcome to Jakarta, to Indonesia, and the land of smokers, the land of tobacco producers. And well, I've read a lot about your work and your long years dedicated to campaigning against tobacco. Now you're the president of Tobacco Free Kids. Now tell me a little bit about the initiative and, you know, what brought you to that, and basically, you know, what is it about and why?
I became involved in the tobacco issue because while we're all used to tobacco smoking, quietly tobacco kills more people every year than any other single cause, and all of those deaths are preventable. So if you want to work on an issue and make a difference, this is an issue where you can make an enormous difference. In the last 7 years across the globe, as a result of tobacco control policies we and our partners have worked on, it's projected that 26 million fewer people will die prematurely from tobacco use. The reason I'm here is because Indonesia faces an epidemic of unqualified proportions, perhaps worse than any place else in the world.
Yeah, I completely and totally agree with you. One of the reasons is because we rely, at least the country relies a lot on tobacco consumption for its revenue. But let me ask you more about the struggle to basically campaign against tobacco, about making it much more difficult to sell cigarettes to minors and making tobacco consuming something less attractive for people in general. Because we are talking about, you know, very big industries with very big names, very big power, enormous lobbies, and you have spent decades in trying to fight against that. I mean, tell me about the struggle, and also what were the really main challenges and what actually made it possible for much more stringent rules against tobacco consumption?
Well, you know, this is in many respects a David versus Goliath fight. Tobacco as a health problem is different than other problems. You know, malaria doesn't hire public lobbyists to oppose mosquito nets. Cholera doesn't hire lawyers to fight ways to reduce tobacco use. The tobacco industry has and continues to fight every effort that people can make in order to reduce tobacco use. And the real irony is they always claim in country after country that tobacco is a part of the inherent culture of the country. What we discover is it's only really an inherent part of the tobacco industry's profit making, that other countries have changed. You know, there's a good news story. 10 years ago, smoking in low and middle and emerging income countries across the globe was going up everywhere. The most recent reports show that throughout Asia, cigarette smoking is going down in virtually every country with one exception. We're sitting in that exception.
Except Indonesia.
Except Indonesia. And it's because the other countries have responded to the crisis. Despite the power of the tobacco industry, they've raised their tax on tobacco products. They have adopted the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, the World Health Organization treaty designed to reduce tobacco use. They've adopted larger graphic health warnings. And in every case when they've done so, they've seen smoking rates decline. Most importantly, they've seen smoking particularly decline among young people.
But what we've seen here in Indonesia, because we also produce our own tobaccos, but we see the brands that were formerly big in their home countries, you know, brands, American brands, actually exporting their goods here and basically settling here and making the business here. And it's not making it that easier for
Well, the
Indonesia
tragedy of
to
Indonesia is that in Indonesia, the tobacco industries are still allowed to engage in marketing tactics, use of images, use of sales tactics that have been banned throughout the rest of the world. You don't go to another country and see billboards right outside of an elementary school. You don't see tobacco companies sponsoring sporting events like badminton elsewhere because the other countries have acted to stop it. And in many cases, the same tobacco companies that are engaging in these tactics here have pledged not to do so because of their impact on children. It raises really important questions. We know that when government acts, we can protect our children. We know that the tobacco industry understands the impact of their behavior on children, and yet in Indonesia, it is literally the tobacco company's playland. It doesn't have to be this way.
How long did it take you and people like you who want to make sure that, you know, the tobacco industry basically gets properly regulated, that they cannot, you know, sell like they do in Indonesia, where people can still buy, you know, single cigarettes, and where people still associate smoking with something that is desirable? I mean, but how long did it actually take? Because, you know, from what I hear, it's a long struggle, and also it's a lot of education involved, especially amongst the tobacco consumers and the public?
You know, in many countries, it took literally decades. I mean, 30 years ago, we didn't appreciate how devastating the health effects were. We weren't sure we knew how to reduce tobacco use. We didn't understand just how significant tobacco marketing was on cultural perceptions and perceptions of our youth. But in a great number of countries, they have sped up the process of change because today you don't have to relearn all of those factors. 10 years ago, in a little country like Uruguay, smoking rates were identical to what we see here. And what has happened there is that they have reduced smoking among adults by 25%. Cigarette smoking among their teens, which were the same as in Indonesia then, are less than half of what it is here. I could name you 20 examples like that. 5 years ago, Russia had the highest smoking rates in the world, and they were seeing smoking among young women particularly skyrocket. They enacted the proposals carried out in the Framework Convention, and what they have seen is double-digit declines in tobacco use each and every year. So what we've learned is that while it may have taken us a long time in many countries years ago, today countries can make a transformation relatively quickly when they have political leadership and when the citizens speak out. It's really about the health of your citizens.
But what was the tipping point in Uruguay, which is an emerging economy like Indonesia? What was it that made them quick when it comes to responding to the tobacco crisis?
I think there's several tipping points that are important. In 2005, the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control was adopted. It's been ratified by 180 countries.
Except Indonesia.
Except Indonesia and one or two other countries. It created a worldwide movement. It gave a roadmap to countries that wanted to change. But the key to change in every one of those countries is political will, political leadership, and a willingness of politicians to stand up to the tobacco companies.
Yeah, which is, you know, in theory and perhaps in law, I mean, we have, you know, regulations and you're not allowed to smoke in public places here, and you know, people literally smoke under the no smoking sign, for example, and no selling cigarettes to minors, but still it happens. And also now we have the pictures on packaging, you know, showing the dangers and also the warning and so on and so forth. And yet it still hasn't worked the way that it's supposed to be. You know, what are your thoughts? What do you think that necessary push that will make Indonesia become aware that smoking is dangerous? Smoking causes basically not only long-term ill health, but it's also not healthy for the government budget, for the country's economy.
It's interesting in Indonesia. We've seen some leadership, particularly at the mayor and governor level, where a number of cities have taken strong steps to reduce smoking indoors, to ban billboards, and take a number of other steps. What it's going to take here is political leadership at the highest level. Ratification of the Framework Convention, increase the size of the graphic warnings, increase the tax on tobacco products. You know, here I keep hearing that tobacco contributes to the economy. Tobacco is a net drain on the Indonesian economy if you take into account healthcare costs, the lost productivity. In Indonesia, in poor families, the men smoke at almost twice the national average. In those families, more money is spent feeding the tobacco addiction than on education and basic food substances. It is contributing to sustaining poverty, not alleviating poverty in Indonesia.
And also the loss of young people, a lot of children, teens, they smoke.
I have not gone
Indonesia.
to any country anywhere in the world where I see more smoking among young people, and I see more really young people starting to smoke. But there's a reason, and that is the tobacco industry marketing continues to create the imagery that makes tobacco attractive to Indonesian young people. That's not happening in other countries anymore because the government isn't letting it happen in those countries. Because the government hasn't taxed these products enough so that they're still cheap and accessible to young people. That's not happening in many other countries as well because of government leadership. I truly am optimistic because the Indonesian president the Indonesian Minister of Health, have said they understand the health consequences. 225,000 Indonesians died last year from tobacco. You have the highest smoking rates among your children anywhere in the globe. You face a health catastrophe unlike the catastrophe faced by almost any other nation anywhere in the world.
So what would be your input? I mean, what your tobacco-free kids, what would you do? What would be the steps that you should take when it comes to dealing with preventing children to be exposed to tobacco in general?
Well, the first steps are very clear. President Jokowi ought to sign the Framework Convention. He ought to increase the size of the warning labels. It's critically important that we ban the kind of sponsorship of sporting events and music events and allow the kind of advertising that make the product so attractive to young people. And then third, he has a great opportunity. If you increase the tax on tobacco products and use those funds to pay for health care for the poor and the needy, and provide some of those funds to enable tobacco growers who want to diversify to do so, you can change the long-term health outlook, the long-term health of your children overnight. It would probably be his greatest public health legacy.
Yeah, unfortunately, the plight of tobacco farmers, they're often used to dilute some of this anti-tobacco sentiment. It always pitted against the welfare of the tobacco farmers who rely, their livelihood rely on growing tobaccos, and also the workers who actually, roll cigarettes or who work in tobacco factories. I mean, how do you sort of convince people that actually, this is not a sustainable way of
doing
it?
It is the most cynical part of the tobacco industry, and that is the way they use the laborers and tobacco growers as their pawns. Yet what we've seen is a decline in laborers in manufacturing, not because of public health measures, but because the same companies have mechanized their plants in order to increase their profitability. We have seen tobacco growers here suffer because tobacco companies chose to import more tobacco because it was cheaper and they could increase their profitability. So the reality is that the tobacco industry brings out the laborers and brings out the farmers even while they take actions to increase their profits. And in this case, we're talking about multinational corporations whose executives live in Switzerland and London, even while hurting the workers and keeping the farmers in almost abject poverty. As a matter of government policy, if you raise the tobacco tax and use some of those funds to enable farmers to diversify, you would expand the economy of Indonesia, not decrease it. You would enable tobacco growers to diversify to crops that would allow them to prosper in a way they can't today. But they're too afraid to speak up because the tobacco companies will punish them.
Mm-hmm. Why do you think it's, especially since everybody knows the health there's issues related to tobacco, and also the fact that in the long run it's costing a lot in terms of treating people in hospitals because of tobacco-related diseases. But why do you think it's so difficult for the government initially, or the establishment, when it comes to facing, because we have had examples of big multinational tobacco companies, they do in the end have to actually come up with a new strategy, and unfortunately the strategy is, export the stuff to
Indonesia
or Africa,
It's exactly right. I think there's two important facts. One is that the people to whom they're selling the cigarettes often don't know and don't understand the real health effects. Today it's increasingly the poor, the uneducated, and in a country like Indonesia, there has not been an effort made to truly help them understand and appreciate the health effects of tobacco use. Whether a country takes on the tobacco issue is the purest form of whether a country's leaders are captured by special interests or whether or not they're willing to stand up to special interests in the interests of their children. This is really about the next generation of Indonesia's kids. Unless strong action is taken, millions of young people in Indonesia today are going to be condemned to die prematurely from lung cancer, heart disease, diabetes, and other tobacco-caused diseases.
Which leads me to how can we educate these consumers, particularly as you say, you know, many of these consumers perhaps they don't even know. I mean, now we have all these warnings, but it doesn't seem to produce, you know, the desired effect. People don't, you know, they're not put off by the packaging. So what sort of education needs to be done?
Well, it's wrong to blame the citizen, because what we have learned is that large graphic warnings are effective in educating young people, the poor, people who don't read. Mass media campaigns funded by the government have been successful. When you ban smoking indoors, it not only changes the air that you and I breathe, it changes the social norm and the behavior of individuals. There is a direct correlation between government adopting the policies and programs which have been proven to work every place they've been adopted, and smoking rates and tobacco-related deaths. I can name you country after country. And what's stunning about Indonesia is that it sits alone throughout the Asian region in failing to take these steps. The most recent data shows dramatic declines in tobacco use from Sri Lanka to India, to the Philippines, to Australia, every country in the region. Indonesia stands out as the only country that has seen smoking rates actually rise over the last 5 years.
Why, do you think?
And the answer is political leadership. Pure and simple political leadership. In each one of those countries, they have adopted either graphic warning labels much larger than Indonesia's, or they've increased the tax on tobacco products. Uniformly, they've funded the kinds of public education campaigns that don't exist here. What we have seen is that when the government does its job, people respond.
So what is the best way of public education on tobacco to the people? Because, you know, there is this still very much the accepted thing that, you know, people smoke. I mean, like you said, now we go to countries and smoking becomes sort of the exception as opposed to the rule, you know. But here it's still very much the normal
what we've seen in other
behavior.
countries is that it's possible to change that normal behavior and those expectations. In countries that have eliminated tobacco advertising and sponsorship, youth attitudes and youth behaviors change rapidly. In countries that have adopted truly large graphic warning labels and funded the kind of mass media campaigns that we don't see here, we have seen change by young people and we've seen change by adults. And that change has translated into reduced incidence of cancer, heart disease, and other serious diseases, which is the reason why I come down to the fact that the issue isn't the problem of teenagers and young citizens, it is government's failure to lead. I'm hopeful that the Indonesian government is beginning to see the importance of taking this action on, and that
You're hopeful because?
I'm hopeful because President Jokowi has spoken about the importance of this issue and has indicated that he is seriously considering ratifying the Framework Convention. Your Minister of Health has spoken out recognizing the importance of the issue. But the Indonesian government isn't speaking with one voice. Your trade minister is literally repeating the same words we hear out of tobacco executives about the importance of tobacco in international trade. Until the government speaks with one voice, the citizens won't know who to follow.
Okay, and the other thing is the idea that, I mean, you said Indonesia stands out because unlike the rest of the region where tobacco consumption is going down, we are actually on the rise. As a matter of fact, you know, there have been this YouTube video of, you know, baby smokers. I mean, it's very, very sad and it's very disturbing. On the other hand, you know, people sort of say, yes, but, you know, smoking, tobacco, and it's very much sort of the Indonesian culture. As a matter of fact, we have, you know, the kretek, that should be part of, you know, if anything, protected as our part of our heritage. And I mean, this kind of thing is going on, and somehow there's refusal to wake up to the reality that at the end of the day, smoking is dangerous. But
I come from the country that created the Marlboro cowboy. And when I began doing this work, people in the United States looked at me like I was crazy. There would be no way that we could eliminate the Marlboro cowboy and the image that it projected throughout not just the United States, but across the globe. The Marlboro cowboy is dead in the United States, and young people are not smoking. Our smoking rates have fallen from a level above Indonesia's to way below Indonesia's. I've seen the same thing in a country like Brazil, where they have even more tobacco growers and both grow and export more tobacco than Indonesia has. 10 years ago, it had smoking rates very similar to Indonesia's, and you heard the same argument. Tobacco use is part of our long-term culture. It's been with us forever. Today, it's a completely different country because the government adopted the strong tobacco control measures, engaged in a massive educational effort. And today, no young person in Brazil would tell you this is an inherent part of our culture. As a matter of fact, what they would say is only losers smoke. So
it's not cool to smoke.
It isn't cool to smoke. There's no image related to smoking. It's not the way I look glamorous. So what we have learned is that in a very short period of time, where government leads and the community engages, we can change what appears to be an impossible change to one where we only ask our question, why did it take so long? The stakes are just too high not to do it.
But Matthew, share with us some of the more effective ways to educate the public. I mean, we are still in a situation where a lot of children are exposed to smoke at home because their parents smoke, and they don't seem to understand that actually they're damaging their children through second-hand, third-hand smoking. And, you know, in public places, people smoke. So share with us some of the best and most effective ways of getting that message across to the consumer.
There are a series of actions that can be taken. Educate students in the schools is a simple first step. Graphic warning labels, eliminating tobacco advertising, funded mass media campaigns that communicate clearly and effectively in a way that everybody understands the actual health effects of tobacco use, increase the price of tobacco use, ban smoking indoors, educate people, including parents, that when they smoke around their children, they're harming the health of their children. What we have seen is that when these policies are adopted, people understand, appreciate, and change their behavior. Therefore, this is one of those social problems that we have solutions for. There are a great many problems in our society today that we don't know how to bring about effective change. This isn't one of them. It takes leadership. It takes an effort by the government to say the health of our children is more important than the profits of the big tobacco companies.
Yeah, but it will take more deaths as well. But what about things like citizen action and people suing tobacco companies, saying it's because of, you know, tobacco consumption, it's because of smoking that, you know, we get this disease? And is that effective, or is that?
Well, I've been encouraged in Indonesia by the number of citizen groups who are speaking up and beginning to demand change in action, by the number of youth groups who are trying to educate their peers and also their politicians, and working with the media about all of these things. All of these things make an important difference with regard to it. The lawsuits that have been brought in a number of countries like the United States, their major value has been they have exposed the fact that when the tobacco companies say they're not certain that their products cause disease, that they've known for decades that those statements are false. That when they say they don't market to young people, their internal marketing documents indicate that that's a lie. And those lawsuits help change public attitudes in the United States and across the globe with regard to it. In a number of countries, we've seen citizens sue their government to demand that it take action to better protect their children.
Yeah, we need to hit them where it hurts, which is in their pockets.
We need to hit them where it hurts, but it requires a comprehensive approach. In Indonesia, your citizens are way ahead of where your government is. My hope is that your government's going to listen. The health consequences are just too great of not doing so.
And your Tobacco Free for Kids, how effective do you think the work that you're are doing at the moment?
We're never satisfied at the pace of change, but the world has changed in the last decade. 10 years ago, smoking rates among young people were going up in virtually every low, middle, and emerging income country across the globe. Today, with the exception of sub-Saharan Africa and Indonesia, we're seeing smoking rates go down in virtually every country. So the pace of change is nowhere near satisfactory. But what is exciting and what is uplifting is that when government has responded, citizens respond.
Matthew, well, thank you very much for sharing with us your work, and I hope that it's in all our interest that for especially children not to be exposed to tobacco, not to be exposed to smoking, and we do have to get that message across that smoking is bad for you, and somehow it's not as easy as
It's a very hard fight.
And also, to be honest, a lot of people I see in government, they smoke. I mean, when you have role models who actually smoke, and that's the other thing. I mean, here, politicians and leaders, and they smoke, and they're seen to smoke, and they don't get penalized for it.
Let me put it this way. If China can change, Indonesia can change. When we began working about 8 years ago in China, politicians, leaders all smoked. Today, they've actually banned their leadership from smoking in public. Last year, for the first time in history, we saw a sharp decline in cigarette sales in China. Why? Beijing has passed a law going 100% smoke-free. They've raised their tax, and they're beginning to think about taking even stronger measures. So change is possible, but it requires leadership.
Yes, it has to start with our leaders not to smoke.
It has to start with leaders not to smoke, and leaders saying there's probably nothing more that I can do that will have a greater positive effect on my citizens than tackling this problem.
Okay, Matt, thank you so much for speaking with us, and good luck.
Thank you very much for having me.
Ya, pemirsa, Indonesia merupakan pasar tembakau dengan pertumbuhan tercepat di dunia dan jumlah perokok remaja terbesar di Asia. Nah, sejauh mana pengendalian penggunaan tembakau di Indonesia akan kita ulas lebih dalam bersama narasumber lainnya sesaat lagi. Ya, kita lanjutkan insight kali ini dari studio. Pemirsa, Indonesia memang merupakan pasar tembakau dengan pertumbuhan tercepat di dunia. Nah, nilai penjualan tembakau mencapai 217 triliun rupiah pada tahun 2015 lalu atau naik 13% dibanding 2014. Nah, bagaimana upaya pengendalian penggunaan tembakau di Indonesia? Kita akan bahas bersama Kartono Muhamad, penasihat Komite Nasional Penanggulangan Tembakau. Halo Pak Kartono, terima kasih bergabung bersama Insight. Pak Kartono, saya tadi bercakap-cakap dengan Matthew Mayers. Dia adalah pejuang anti tembakau yang sama berpuluh-puluh tahun ya sebagai seorang lawyer atau pengacara, dan dia juga presiden dari Tobacco Free Kids, campaign untuk supaya anak-anak tidak terpapar tembakau. Nah, di Indonesia sendiri kita sering sekali seolah-olah bangga bahwa kita adalah salah satu masyarakat perokok terbesar di dunia dengan pertumbuhan tercepat di dunia. Pak Kartono sendiri melihat bagaimana? Ini kan sebenarnya bukan prestasi yang harus kita banggakan, justru kita khawatirkan.
Seharusnya bukan prestasi yang kita banggakan. Seharusnya kita malah malu. Karena terutama yang merokok banyak sekarang itu anak-anak dan remaja. Sebab kalau yang tua kan sudah jenuh. 63% orang dewasa Indonesia laki-laki merokok. Tidak, untuk menaikkan menjadi 70% susah sekali tentunya. Jadi sekarang industri rokok mengarahkan sasaran mereka kepada remaja dan anak-anak, itu logis.
Dan kalau remaja, anak-anak mulai merokok, ya masa depan mereka otomatis juga akan berdampak sangat negatif. Dan juga bangsa Indonesia ini sendiri akan memiliki orang-orang yang pada akhirnya kan tidak sehat, mungkin akan meninggal pada belum waktunya. Nah, Matthew Mayer sendiri mengatakan bahwa untuk mengurangi pengaruh dari industri tembakau ini yang diperlukan itu adalah komitmen dari pemerintah. Menurut Pak Kartono, bagaimana komitmen pemerintah kita, apalagi dari kementerian-kementerian yang sangat bergantung kepada revenue atau pendapatan dari rokok, dan political will itu dari mereka tuh Anda lihat seperti apa sih sebenarnya?
Saya anggap bahwa di Indonesia komitmen itu masih rendah. Tidak hanya di pemerintah, juga parlemen. Karena di Indonesia ini yang berkuasa di Indonesia kan partai politik. Ya. Jadi partai politik masih membutuhkan dana. Dan yang bersedia dengan senang hati untuk meluncurkan dana itu paling besar adalah industri rokok. Industri rokok itu dananya nyaris tak terbatas, langit batasnya. Jadi disitulah kelemahan dari para politikus kita, sehingga ya bagaimana lagi ya, kita mengharapkan integritas dari para pemimpin bangsa yang di eksekutif, yang di parlemen, terus terang saja sudah mencemaskan. Citra parlemen kan sudah sangat buruk saat ini.
Sementara lobby-lobby dari industri rokok kan begitu gencar ya. Ini Pak Kartono lihat lebih ke masalah uang atau bagaimana? Karena kalau kita lihat kan sekarang tren dunia di mana-mana, kita tidak harus melihat jauh-jauh ke negara mati mayas di Amerika Serikat, tapi negara tetangga seperti Singapura, dan mereka jauh lebih tanggap terhadap betapa rokok itu membahayakan. Apa kira-kira yang salah dalam pengelolaan dan visi Indonesia terhadap yang namanya rokok itu?
Karena para politikus kita umumnya short-sighted. Mereka hanya memikir selama saya berkuasa. Sesudah saya pergi silakan datang banjir. Jadi dia tidak berpikir, mereka itu pada umumnya tidak mikir anak-anak kita itu yang dia tinggalkan itu nanti akan bagaimana, itu bukan urusan mereka lagi, urusan pemerintah yang akan datang. Terus-menerus seperti itu, short-sighted. Jadi tidak pernah berpikir jauh bagaimana supaya generasi yang akan datang itu adalah generasi yang bermutu, yang sanggup bersaing dengan bangsa lain.
Ya mungkin karena mereka juga banyak kan perokok, jadi mereka menganggap bahwa ya ini tidak...
Enggak semuanya, iya mungkin karena memang pada umumnya mereka merokok, tapi juga mereka tergantung pada industri rokok.
Tapi apakah memang Indonesia sangat tergantung kepada industri rokok untuk penghasilan?
Untuk penghasilan negara tidak. Industri rokok menyumbang di ekonomi itu hanya nomor berapa? Jauh di bawah, nggak pernah terdengar.
Jadi sebenarnya Indonesia tidak akan mati ya kalau industri
tidak akan
rokok
mati.
Ini berkurang ininya konsumsinya.
Kalau ya konsumsi rokok di Indonesia berkurang itu Indonesia tidak mati. Selalu industri rokok atau politikus pembela industri rokok itu selalu membanggakan industri rokok menyumbang cukai 150 triliun per tahun.
Dan menciptakan tenaga kerja yang begitu banyak.
Enggak juga. Tapi kalau 150 triliun yang membayar bukan industri rokok, yang membayar konsumennya. Kalau itu dianggap jasa, berarti rokok Indonesia lebih berjasa kepada Singapura daripada ke Indonesia, karena di Singapura cukainya tinggi.
Jadi sebenarnya cukai kita juga masih bisa dinaikkan.
Masih
kan,
bisa dinaikkan kalau mau.
Pak Kartono, saya tertarik karena dari Komnas Penanggulangan Tembakau itu, kira-kira apa yang selama ini diperjuangkan, dilakukan, dan bagaimana untuk melobi pemerintah supaya mempengaruhi lah istilahnya, kan kalau tidak salah ada RUU pertembakauan yang segera akan digodok lah istilahnya. Kira-kira apa yang perlu dimasukkan dalam RUU itu?
RUU pertembakauan ini sebetulnya undang-undang yang berusaha mengendalikan konsumsi rokok sudah ada, yaitu Undang-Undang Kesehatan, Undang-Undang Cukai. Undang-Undang Cukai itu kan mengatakan barang yang dikenakan cukai adalah barang yang konsumsinya perlu dikendalikan karena membahayakan buat konsumen. Itu adalah Undang-Undang Cukai. Jadi kalau kita pakai prinsip itu pun kita perlu mengendalikan rokok, karena rokok kan dikenakan. Lalu undang-undang pertembakauan ini di samping undang-undang cegah dan undang-undang kesehatan, undang-undang pertambakan kan diusulkan oleh industri rokok. Isinya, dalihnya, preteksnya adalah melindungi petani tembakau, tapi isi dari undang-undang itu tidak, hanya sedikit yang bicara soal petani tembakau. Selebihnya adalah pada soal rokok.
Kepentingan mereka ya.
Industri rokok. Jadi bagaimana rokok diproduksi, bagaimana dipasarkan dan sebagainya.
Dan bagaimana mereka harus impor tembakau lebih banyak lagi dan lain sebagainya.
Itu kenyataan. Dari bahwa sekarang kita lebih banyak impor daripada menggunakan tembakau lokal, kenyataan. Jadi kalau kita mau menolong petani tembakau, tolonglah mereka supaya posisi tawar mereka menghadapi industri rokok cukup tinggi.
Iya, dan sekarang sudah terbukti bahwa industri tembakau itu tidak menguntungkan bagi atau tidak membawakan banyak benefit bagi para petani tembakau.
Juga tidak betul bahwa industri rokok menyerap tenaga kerja banyak. Tenaga produksi industri manufacturing yang lain seperti garment, sepatu lebih banyak menyerap tenaga kerja. Kalau industri rokok, apalagi sekarang karena kebanyakan pabrik rokok mekanisasi, makin sedikit tenaga manusia diperlukan.
Iya, kita break sebentar Pak Kartono, tapi kita lanjutkan pembahasan mengenai upaya pengendalian tembakau setelah informasi berikut lagi. Masih bersama Insight, kita lanjutkan pembahasan mengenai upaya Indonesia mengendalikan tembakau. Saya ditemani oleh Kartono Muhamad, penasihat dari Komite Nasional atau Komnas Penanggulangan Tembakau. Pak Kartono, tadi kita sudah sebutkan bahwa Indonesia memiliki jumlah perokok remaja terbesar di Asia. Bukan suatu prestasi di dunia. Ini bukan suatu prestasi yang membanggakan tentu saja. Dan kita juga melihat bahwa jumlah bukan saja anak muda, tapi sponsor yang dari musik, olahraga dan lain sebagainya itu masih sangat bergantung kepada industri tembakau. Tentu saja ini mendapat dampaknya itu sangat negatif, ya, memberikan citra bahwa merokok itu adalah sesuatu yang positif begitu. Nah, ini berarti harus ada semacam edukasi yang lebih luas mengenai bahaya rokok khususnya terhadap anak-anak dan remaja. Kira-kira apa yang selama ini Komite Nasional Penanggulangan
Jadi sekarang ini sudah mulai banyak organisasi remaja yang bergerak untuk menentang rokok. Ada smoke free agents, itu juga bergabung di dalam Kornas PT. Ada grup 9 cm kalau nggak salah di Jogja. Ada banyak kelompok-kelompok kecil gitu. Mereka juga berupaya melakukan pendidikan kepada teman sebaya. Tapi samping itu kita melakukan juga advokasi. Sebetulnya lebih banyak kita ingin bahwa pemerintah itu betul-betul komit. Tidak usah takut pada industri rokok. Jangan pemerintah didikte. Sering pemerintah mengatakan kita tidak mau didikte oleh pemeras, tidak mau didikte oleh teroris. Jangan juga mau didikte oleh industri rokok.
Yang bahayanya itu jelas-jelas terbukti dan ada selalu di depan mata.
Dan jangka panjang bahayanya itu kan melemahkan generasi yang akan datang. Bayangkan nanti. Dan
menjadi beban terhadap kesehatan kita.
Ekonomi dan ekonomi. Mungkin pemerintah sekarang tidak begitu merasakan karena kalau orang sakit berobat dibayar oleh sendiri dari kantong, out of pocket. Jadi kantong sendiri oleh masyarakat. Jadi pemerintah tidak merasa, saya mengeluarkan uang banyak.
Ya, tapi dengan adanya BPJS dan lain
sekarang baru mereka merasa. Sekarang BPJS merasa bahwa santunan untuk penyakit yang berkaitan dengan rokok ternyata membuat BPJS tekor, kekurangan dana. Ya, sekarang mulai, tapi kan artinya baru mulai. Kita terus
baru mulai sadar ya tampaknya.
Baru mulai sadar di kalangan BPJS.
Nah, selama ini apa kira-kira tantangan yang dihadapi khusus oleh Komnas Penanggulangan? Tantangannya
adalah sikap politik. Seperti saya katakan tadi, sikap partai politik. Karena partai negeri ini dikuasai, di manage oleh partai politik. Jadi yang menentukan
Dan masih sangat tergantung pada uang dari industri tembakau itu. Ya.
Partai politik ini lagi memerlukan duit banyak, terutama menjelang pemilu, pilkada lah, pilpres dan sebagainya. Jadi mau tidak mau mereka mudah tergiur. Kalau soal sponsorship, ya masalahnya adalah memang sponsorship industri rokok itu adalah sponsorship semu. Artinya tidak betul-betul membantu. Mereka mau membantu, tapi bagian dari promosi. Kalau mereka betul-betul membantu, tidak ada pamrih, mereka tidak promosi produk. Tapi setiap sponsorship mesti disebut produk, disponsori. Jadi mereka itu sebenarnya tidak sponsorship, tapi promosi. Nah, itu yang harusnya diatur oleh pemerintah.
Ya, kalau kita lihat juga di negara-negara lain mereka sudah tidak boleh memasarkan diri dalam bentuk apapun ya. Bahkan sekarang kemasan rokok itu sendiri di harus Australia misalnya tidak ada brandnya, tidak ada namanya karena nama sering diasosiasikan dengan gaya hidup dan hal-hal yang sifatnya
warna juga kadang-kadang kan maka warnanya semua sama kalau di Australia bungkus rokok. Nah di Indonesia tentu saya bisa mengerti bahwa banyak seniman yang merasa saya ini disponsori oleh rokok, jadi saya akan bela industri rokok. Sebetulnya itu satu sikap yang bunuh diri sebetulnya. Tapi oke lah, tapi seharusnya ada bisnis lain yang mau mengganti. Seandainya itu pertama, kalau ada semacam, saya yakin bisnis yang lain tuh bisa menggantikan sponsor rokok kalau mereka mau. Yang kedua adalah kalau cukai dinaikkan, sebagian dari cukai itu untuk mengganti sponsorship itu. Jadi untuk olahraga, untuk kesenian, diambilkan dari kenaikan cukai itu.
Jadi cukai seharusnya masih bisa dinaikkan. Idealnya berapa persen lagi Pak Kartono? Karena ini juga akan sangat membantu dalam pendapatan.
Kalau alkohol sekarang dicukai 80%, mengapa rokok hanya 57%? Mengapa enggak rokok disamakan dengan alkohol, sama-sama adiktif? Misalnya rokok 80%, harganya pun dinaikkan harusnya. Harga jual rokok harusnya dinaikkan. Misalnya menjadi 30.000
jauh
atau 50.000.
Sehingga sulit terjangkau khususnya bagi anak-anak
orang miskin
muda. Mungkin terakhir Pak Kartono dan agak singkat contoh advokasi yang selama ini dilakukan khusus pada pemerintah dan pemerintah daerah karena mereka tampaknya paling resisten ya terhadap ini. Apa-apa saja dan apa yang kira-kira berhasil?
Kalau ke pemerintah daerah, kita meng-approach pimpinan daerah, menyadarkan bahwa ini adalah untuk kepentingan mereka. Bahwa kalau penduduk situ sehat, biaya beban kesehatan akan berkurang dan banyak keuntungan yang bisa diambil dari pelarangan merokok. Oleh karena itu sekarang ada sekitar 200 kabupaten kota yang sudah mempunyai aturan tentang kawasan tanpa rokok.
Ya, walaupun sering tidak diikuti oleh masyarakat itu sendiri ya.
Perokok itu biasanya egois, jadi mereka tidak
paling tidak sudah ada keiktikat untuk sana. Sekarang implementasinya itu bagaimana?
Nah sekarang DKI sajalah iklan rokok tidak boleh sekarang kan tidak ada iklan rokok di jalan.
Ya, jadi sudah ada kemajuan paling tidak. Terima kasih banyak Pak Kartono dan semoga upaya dari Komnas juga untuk mengurangi ya ketergantungan banyak masyarakat kita terhadap merokok itu juga bisa dikurangi dan yang paling penting adalah political will dan kebijakan. Tanpa ada political will mau diapain susah ya. Ya, memang permasalahan pengendalian tembakau masih menjadi dilema di Indonesia. Di satu sisi Indonesia memang membutuhkan investasi dan penerimaan dari industri rokok, namun di sisi lain besarnya prevalensi perokok di Indonesia menyebabkan juga tingginya angka penderita dan biaya yang harus dikeluarkan oleh pemerintah dan juga oleh individu untuk penyakit akibat tembakau. Memang dibutuhkan kerjasama semua pihak, baik pemerintah maupun industri rokok dan juga masyarakat untuk mengurangi tingginya prevalensi perokok serta dampak buruk yang ditimbulkan rokok bagi kesehatan. Demikian Insight kali ini. Jangan lupa saksikan kembali Insight besok bersama saya Desi Anwar. Bye-bye. Sampai jumpa.